Okay, welcome to week 1 in our readings through the New Testament. We're going to cover John chapters 1 through 10. Hopefully you've already done the readings. In this first video, we're going to talk about a theme that hopefully you've noticed. The writer of this gospel is trying to answer the question, who is Jesus? And in John, we're going to learn the answer to this, who Jesus is. Now, John chapter 1 and verse 1 starts off like this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. Now, John is talking about Jesus here. When he says the Word, he's referring to Jesus. In Greek, it's the word logos, and he's talking about the person of Jesus Christ, who Jesus is. And I don't know if you notice the similarity between John chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 1. Genesis is the first book in the Bible, and it starts off like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. You see the same thing? In the beginning, just like how the Gospel of John starts off. And he's trying to draw a parallel between these two things. In fact, it says in Genesis 1:3, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. Now let's go back to John chapter 1. Look at what the author of this gospel says. In Jesus was life, and that life was the light of men. There's this word light, just like we see in Genesis 1. And the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. And so we see that there's a parallel between John 1 and Genesis 1. And the reason is because Jesus is God. It says it like this in chapter 1, verse 14. The Word, Jesus, became flesh. That means that he existed beforehand. So the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Jesus, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. See, John is trying to point this out from the very get-go. Jesus is more than a prophet. He's not like John the Baptist. Jesus is more than a prophet. He is God himself. He's not just a rabbi. He's not just a teacher. He's God himself. Now, he's not the Father. He's the Son. I know that can be confusing that Jesus is the Son, yet at the same time, he's fully God. And you can go see the Trinity series in our Pursue God library for more on this a little bit later on if you're interested in that. But let's just finish this video with this. John 8, verse 56, Jesus is talking to a bunch of Jewish people, and he says to them, your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day. He saw it and was glad. And here's how they responded to him. Hey, you're not yet 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? And look at Jesus' response in verse 58. He says this, I tell you the truth, before Abraham was born, I am. And at this they picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds. So see, the reason they were going to stone him is because when he said, I am, he was using the term for God in the Old Testament. God's name in the Old Testament was Yahweh, or I am. When he introduced himself to Moses, he says, I am that I am. That's my name, I am. And Jesus was claiming to be God right here in verse 58. Jesus was claiming to be God, and that was something that was blasphemous in the minds of the Jews, and so they wanted to stone him. See, John thought Jesus was God, and Jesus thought Jesus was God. And the reason is because Jesus is God. And that's the first thing you need to know about John chapters 1 through 10. Now, why don't you hit pause right now and answer some or all of these questions in red as a group before you move on to the next video.